Not hers. Not yet. But Dulce could smell it in the dust, taste it in the air thick with cruelty. The last girl standing. The one nobody wanted. When the mountain man stepped forward, scarred, silent, feared by every soul in Copperbend, she knew her life had just changed forever. But was it salvation or something worse? This is a story about the unwanted finding family in the most impossible places. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The sun beat down on Copperbend like a punishment, turning the dirt street into something closer to ash. Dulce stood on the auction platform with splinters digging into her bare feet, her wrists bound with rope that had already rubbed her skin raw. She was the seventh girl brought up that afternoon. The last one left. The auctioneer, a man named Horace, with tobacco-stained teeth and a voice like gravel in a tin can, was losing patience. "Strong back," he called out, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. "Good for field work, laundry, whatever you need. Starting bid, $2. Silence. Dulce kept her eyes down. She'd learned that lesson early at the workhouse. Never look them in the eye. It only made things worse. Her dress, a shapeless gray sack that had been mended so many times it was more thread than fabric, hung loose on her frame. Broad-shouldered, yes. Strong, maybe. But pretty? The other girls had been pretty. They'd been claimed within minutes, led away by farmers' wives or merchants looking for house help. She was what remained. $2, Horace repeated, scanning the crowd with increasing desperation. Hell, $1. Anyone? A woman in a blue bonnet whispered something to her husband. They both laughed. Dulce's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. "She's built like a mule," someone called from the back. "Probably eats like one too," another voice added. More laughter rippled through the crowd. Dulce's fingers curled into fists behind her back. The rope bit deeper. Horace wiped sweat from his forehead. "Look, she ain't gonna win no beauty contest, but she can work. I got papers here says she's 17, healthy, no diseases." "Is she simple?" a man interrupted. "Why's she just standing there like that?" "She ain't simple," Horace snapped. "She's obedient. That's what you want, ain't it?" The crowd murmured, but no hands went up. Dulce felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart breaking, because that had happened years ago. This was different. This was the final confirmation of what she'd always suspected. She was worth nothing, not even a single dollar to these people. "All right," Horace muttered, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket. "All right. If nobody wants her, she goes back to the workhouse and I'll take her." The voice cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. Every head turned. Dulce looked up for the first time. The man stood at the edge of the crowd, half in shadow despite the blazing sun. Tall. Taller than anyone she'd ever seen. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the sky, his arms thick with muscle earned from something harder than farm work. He wore a heavy coat despite the heat, dark wool that had seen better days, and his hat cast a shadow over most of his face. But she could see his eyes. Gray, cold, unreadable. The crowd parted as he moved forward, not out of respect, out of fear. Dulce saw it in the way people stepped back, in the way mothers pulled their children closer. Even Horace went pale. "Mr. Cutter," the auctioneer said, his voice suddenly thin. "Didn't expect to see you down from the mountain." The man, Cutter, didn't respond. He just kept walking until he stood directly in front of the platform, looking up at Dulce with those gray eyes that revealed nothing. "How much?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. Horace stammered. "Well, I was asking $2, but seeing as nobody, $2. Cutter reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out the coins with careful, deliberate movements and placed them on the edge of the platform. "She comes with me now." It wasn't a question. Horace grabbed the money so fast he nearly dropped it. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. She's all yours." He fumbled with the papers, his hand shaking. "Just need you to sign here," and Cutter took the pen and scrawled something that might have been a signature. He didn't look at the papers, didn't read the terms. His eyes stayed on Dulce. She stared back, trying to understand what she was seeing in that weathered face. He had scars, a long one running from his temple down to his jaw, another across his knuckles. His beard was thick and dark, streaked with gray. He looked like the kind of man who'd seen violence up close and personal, who maybe even preferred it. The rope around her wrists loosened. Horace had cut it, eager to be done with the whole transaction. "There you go, Mr. Cutter. She's yours, free and clear. No returns, of course, but I'm sure you won't have any—" "Come on!" Cutter turned and started walking. Dulce didn't move. Her feet felt nailed to the platform. He stopped, looked back. "You coming or not?" "I—" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. She cleared her throat, tried again. "Where are you taking me?" "My place. Up the mountain." The crowd had gone completely silent now, watching this exchange like it was better than any traveling show. "What do you want me for, yes?" Dulce asked. The question hung in the air, loaded with all the implications she was afraid to name. Something flickered in Cutter's eyes. It might have been surprise. "You'll work. You'll earn your keep, same as anyone." "Doing what?" His jaw tightened. "We'll figure that out when we get there. Now come on, we're losing daylight." A woman in the crowd, the same one who'd laughed earlier, leaned toward her companion. Poor thing. Better the workhouse than whatever he's got planned. Cutter heard. Dulce saw his shoulders go rigid, saw his hand curl into a fist, but he didn't turn around, didn't respond, just waited. Dulce looked back at Horace, who avoided her eyes. Looked at the crowd, at all those faces that had deemed her worthless. Looked at the road leading back to the workhouse, where she'd spent the last 8 years scrubbing floors until her hands bled, eating watery soup, sleeping on a mattress shared with 3 other girls. Then she looked at Cutter again. At this scarred, silent mountain man who'd paid $2 for something nobody else wanted. She stepped down from the platform. Her legs shook, whether from fear or relief, she couldn't tell. She walked toward him, past the crowd that whispered and pointed, past Horace, who was already counting his money, past all of it. When she reached Cutter, he gave a single nod and started walking again. She followed. Behind them, the whispers grew louder. "He's going to work her to death up there. Worse than that, probably. Remember what happened to that trapper who wandered onto his land? She'll be dead within a month." Dulce heard every word. She kept walking. Cutter led her to a wagon at the edge of town, a rough wooden thing pulled by a massive gray horse that looked as unfriendly as its owner. He gestured to the back without speaking. She climbed in, settling herself among sacks of flour and salt, tools wrapped in oilcloth, supplies for someone who clearly didn't come to town often. He climbed up front, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horse started moving. They rode in silence. Copper Bend disappeared behind them, swallowed by dust and distance. The road turned rough, then rougher, then barely a road at all. They climbed. The air cooled. Pine trees appeared, growing thicker and taller until they blocked out most of the sky. Dulce watched Cutter's back, looking for clues. He sat perfectly still except for the occasional adjustment to the reins. His coat stretched tight across his shoulders. Once, she saw him roll his neck like it ached. "What's your name?" she finally asked. He didn't turn around. "You heard it. Cutter. Your first name." "Don't use it." "Why not?" "Don't like it." She waited for more. Nothing came. "I'm Dulce," she offered. "Dulce May." "I know. Was on the papers." Another silence stretched between them. The wagon creaked. The horse's hooves made soft sounds on the pine needle-covered path. "How far is your place?" she asked. "Few more hours." "What kind of work will I be doing?" "Cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing." He paused. "You know how to cook?" "Some. Workhouse didn't exactly—" "You'll learn." The finality in his tone killed the conversation. Dulce leaned back against a flour sack, watching the trees slide past. The light changed as they climbed higher, turning golden, then amber, then a deep purple that meant evening was coming. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, the wagon had stopped. Cutter was standing beside it, looking up at her. "We're here." Dulce sat up, blinking. It took her a moment to focus in the gathering darkness. The cabin sat in a small clearing, backed against the mountain itself. It was bigger than she'd expected, 2 stories built from thick logs that looked like they'd been there longer than she'd been alive. A porch wrapped around the front, and smoke curled from a stone chimney. Windows glowed with lamplight from inside. It looked almost welcoming. "Come on," Cutter said, already heading toward the front door. Dulce climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the ride. She followed him up the porch steps, noting the way the wood was worn smooth in the middle from years of boots crossing it. He opened the door and stepped aside, letting her enter first. The interior was warm. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The main room was simple but well kept. A table, chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, shelves lined with books and supplies. No clutter, no mess. Everything had its place. It was cleaner than the workhouse had ever been. "Kitchen's through there," Cutter said, pointing to a doorway. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the right. There's a bed, blankets, wash basin too." Dulce turned to look at him. "My room? You got a problem with that?" I thought." She stopped, unsure how to voice what she'd assumed, that she'd be sleeping in a barn, in a corner, on the floor. "Thought what?" His gray eyes pinned her in place. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Thank you." He grunted and moved past her to the fireplace, adding another log. "There's bread and cheese in the kitchen if you're hungry." "Well, water's outside, pumps on the side of the house. Privy's out back. Don't go wandering after dark. These woods aren't safe." "Safe from what?" "Bears, cats, cliffs you can't see until you're falling off them." He straightened, brushing bark from his hands. "Stay close to the cabin until you know the land." She nodded, still trying to process all of this. "When do I start working?" "Tomorrow's soon enough." He moved toward the stairs. "I'm going to bed. Keep the fire going if you're staying up. Don't let it die." He was halfway up the stairs when she called out, "Mr. Cutter?" He stopped, didn't turn around. "Why did you buy me? Nobody else wanted to, but you did. Why?" His back went rigid. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, "Get some sleep, Dulce. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He climbed the rest of the stairs and disappeared down the hallway. A door closed with a soft click. Dulce stood alone in the warm room, listening to the fire crackle, trying to understand what had just happened to her life. She walked to the kitchen, a small, neat space with a cast-iron stove, a table, shelves stocked with dry goods. She found the bread and cheese he'd mentioned. Both were fresh. She cut herself a piece of each, then stood at the window eating, looking out at the darkness beyond. The mountain pressed close. She could feel its weight, its presence. This was about as far from town as a person could get and still be in the same world. She finished eating, washed her plate in the basin, and climbed the stairs. The second door on the right opened to a small room with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the trees. The bed had real blankets, a pillow, clean sheets. Dulce sat on the edge of the mattress, testing it. Soft. Not by much, but softer than anything she'd slept on in 8 years. She lay back, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, something howled. Not a wolf. Something bigger, deeper. The sound echoed off the mountains and died away into silence. Dulce closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions. Either way, she was here now, on this mountain with a man who scared an entire town, but had given her a room with a real bed and told her to sleep. It made no sense. Nothing about this day made sense. But she was so tired. Tired of standing on auction blocks. Tired of being unwanted. Tired of wondering if there was anything in this world that could be different from what she'd known. Sleep came quickly, pulling her under before she could fight it. She woke to the smell of coffee. Morning light streamed through the window, bright and clear. For a moment, Dulce couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The auction, the mountain man, the ride up through the trees. She sat up, running her hands through her tangled hair. Someone was moving around downstairs. Pots clanged. Water ran. She stood, smoothed her dress as best she could, and headed down. Cutter was in the kitchen, standing at the stove. He'd taken off his heavy coat. Without it, he looked somehow bigger. All that muscle and bulk uncontained. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with scars and burns. He glanced up when she entered. "You're up. Good. Sit." She sat at the table, watching as he poured coffee into a tin cup and set it in front of her. Then he turned back to the stove, where something was frying in a cast-iron pan. "Do you take milk?" he asked. Yes, if you have it." He poured milk from a pitcher, added it to her coffee without asking how much. She didn't complain. A few minutes later, he set a plate in front of her. Eggs, fried potatoes, thick slices of bacon, More food than she'd seen on a single plate in years. "Eat," he said, sitting across from her with his own plate. Dulce picked up her fork. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the potatoes crispy at the edges, the bacon still sizzling. She took a bite and had to fight not to make a sound. It was good. Really good. Cutter ate in silence, methodical and efficient. When he finished, he drained his coffee and stood. "I've got work to do outside. You clean up in here, then we'll talk about your other duties." "Yes, sir." He paused at the door. "Don't call me sir, Cutter's fine." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with a plate of food and 100 questions. She finished eating, washed the dishes, swept the floor. It felt strange to move through someone else's space, to touch their things. Everything was orderly, purposeful. No decoration, no softness, but no cruelty either. When she went outside, she found Cutter chopping wood behind the cabin. He'd stripped down to just his undershirt, and sweat gleamed on his arms despite the cool mountain air. An axe rose and fell with mechanical precision, splitting logs like they were nothing. She stood watching for a moment, then cleared her throat. "You wanted to talk about duties?" He buried the axe in the chopping block and straightened, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "You ever tend chickens?" "A few times, at the workhouse. I've got a coop out past the trees. They need feeding, eggs collected every morning. Can you handle that?" "Yes." "Laundry needs doing once a week. There's a washboard and tub in the shed. Garden needs weeding. I'll show you which plants to keep and which to pull. Meals 3 times a day, bread every few days." She nodded, committing it all to memory. "You'll have time to yourself in the afternoons," he continued. "I don't need you working every minute. This isn't the workhouse." That caught her off guard. "What should I do with that time?" He shrugged. "Whatever you want. Read, walk, rest. Just stay within sight of the cabin for now." "Why did you buy me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Cutter's jaw worked. He looked away toward the trees. "Needed help around here. Winter's coming. Too much work for one person. You could have hired someone from town. Someone who wanted to come." "Townfolk don't like coming up here." His tone went flat. "And I don't like them." "So you bought an unwanted girl instead." His eyes snapped back to her, sharp. "Is that what you think you are? Unwanted? Isn't it true?" "No." The word came out hard, definite. "You're here now. That's what matters." She wanted to push, to dig deeper, but something in his expression warned her off. This man had walls around him thick as the cabin logs, and she wasn't getting through them today. "I'll feed the chickens," she said instead. He nodded, picked up the axe again. "Coop's that way. Don't let them peck you." She walked in the direction he'd pointed, following a worn path through the trees. The forest here was different from anything she'd known. Quiet, but alive, full of small sounds that took her a while to identify. Birds, wind in the branches, something rustling in the undergrowth. The chicken coop was a sturdy wooden structure with a wire run. 6 hens clucked and scratched inside. Dulce found the feed in a covered bin, scattered it like she'd been taught, and collected 5 warm eggs from the nesting boxes. When she returned to the cabin, Cutter was stacking split wood against the side of the house. He didn't look up, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly when she came into view, like he'd been listening for her, like he'd been worried. The thought lodged itself in her chest, strange and uncomfortable. The days that followed established a rhythm. Dulce woke early, made coffee, started breakfast. Cutter ate quickly and disappeared to work on whatever project he had going, chopping wood, repairing the roof, reinforcing the shed. She cleaned, weeded the garden, did laundry. In the afternoons, she sat on the porch with a book from his collection. Simple stories, nothing fancy, but words on a page she could lose herself in. He barely spoke to her, just instructions, brief answers to questions. But he never raised his voice, never criticized. When she burned the bread her second day there, he just cut away the charred parts and ate the rest without comment. When she asked him to show her how to work the wood stove properly, he demonstrated without making her feel stupid for not knowing. When she cut her hand on a broken plate, he cleaned it with steady hands and wrapped it carefully, his touch surprisingly gentle. Slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the tight knot of fear in her chest began to loosen. One afternoon, she was sitting on the porch when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see a rider approaching, a man in a sheriff's badge, middle-aged, with a thick mustache and suspicious eyes. Cutter emerged from the shed, his expression going hard. "Sheriff Dobbs," he said, no warmth in his voice. "Cutter." The sheriff dismounted, tied his horse to the porch rail. His eyes found Dulce, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "This the girl you bought at auction?" "She is. Got some folks in town asking questions, wanting to know if she's settling in all right." "She's fine." "Maybe I should hear that from her." Dobbs looked at Dulce again. "You being treated well, girl?" Dulce glanced at Cutter, whose face had gone completely blank. She looked back at the sheriff. "Yes, sir. Mr. Cutter's been—" She searched for the right word. "Fair." Dobbs snorted. "Fair. That's what we're calling it?" He turned back to Cutter. "You know the law says I can inspect the premises if there's concern about—" "There's no concern," Cutter cut him off. "She works. She eats. She sleeps in her own room with a lock on the inside of the door. Anything else you need to know?" The sheriff's face reddened. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job is done. Get off my land." For a moment, they stared at each other. Then Dobbs spat tobacco juice into the dirt and climbed back on his horse. "I'll be checking back," he said. "Regularly." "You do that." The sheriff rode away, disappearing into the trees. Cutter stood perfectly still until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he turned to Dulce. "You have a lock on your door," he said quietly. "Use it if you want to, or don't. Your choice." He went back into the shed before she could respond. Dulce sat there, processing what had just happened. The sheriff's visit, Cutter's defense of her, that detail about the lock she'd never noticed. That night she checked her door. Sure enough, there was a simple bolt lock on the inside. She ran her fingers over it, thinking. She didn't slide it closed. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The mountains grew colder. Frost appeared on the ground in the mornings, melting by midday. Cutter started preparing for winter in earnest, chopping more wood, checking the roof, salting meat. Dulce learned to bake bread that didn't burn, learned to recognize the difference between weeds and herbs in the garden, learned the particular rhythm of this quiet life, and learned, bit by bit, to watch Cutter. He was a man of habits, rose with the sun, drank his coffee black and scalding hot, worked until his shirt was soaked through with sweat, then worked some more. He read at night, sitting by the fire, his face softened by the flickering light into something almost peaceful. He was also a man haunted by something. She'd hear him sometimes, late at night, pacing in his room. Once she woke to the sound of something breaking, followed by his voice, low and angry, speaking words she couldn't make out. The next morning, he'd cleaned up whatever he'd broken and said nothing about it. She wanted to ask, wanted to understand what had happened to put those scars on his face, that darkness in his eyes. But the walls around him never came down, and she didn't have the courage to try scaling them, until the day she found the photograph. She'd been cleaning, dusting the shelves in the main room, when something fell from behind a row of books. A small frame, cheap wood, glass cracked in one corner. She picked it up carefully. The photograph showed a woman and a child. A little girl, maybe 4 or 5. The woman was pretty in a simple way, dark-haired, smiling. The girl had the same smile, gap-toothed and bright. Dulce was still staring at it when Cutter came in from outside. He saw what she was holding and went absolutely still. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, setting it down. "It fell. I didn't mean to—" "It's fine." But his voice wasn't fine. It was tight, strained. She should have left it alone. Should have gone back to dusting, pretended she'd never seen it. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Who are they?" Cutter stared at the photograph for a long moment. His hands curled into fists at his sides, then slowly relaxed. "My wife," he said finally. "My daughter." The past tense hit her like a physical blow. "What happened?" she whispered. "Fever took them. 5 years ago. Both of them within a week of each other." His voice was flat, empty. "I was out on a hunting trip. Came back to an empty cabin." Dulce felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so sorry." He bent down, picked up the photograph, looked at it with an expression that broke her heart. "She told me not to go. Said she had a bad feeling. I went anyway." He set the frame back on the shelf, face down. "So that's why I'm up here alone. That's why town folk don't like me. And that's why I bought you at that auction. Because I know what it's like to be something nobody wants. To be alone with that. He walked past her, up the stairs, and closed his door. Dulce stood in the quiet room, understanding flooding through her. This man wasn't a monster. He was broken, just like her, just in different ways. And maybe, just maybe, they could help each other heal. If she could ever find the courage to tell him her own secret, the one she carried like a weight in her chest, growing heavier every day, the son she'd been forced to leave behind. That night, Dulce lay awake staring at the ceiling beams, Cutter's confession playing over and over in her mind. A wife, a daughter, both gone. The photograph face down on the shelf because looking at it hurt too much. She understood that kind of pain. Not the same shape, but the same weight. Her hand moved to her stomach, fingers pressing against fabric and skin, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. A habit she couldn't break. 3 years since she'd given birth in a back room of the workhouse, 19 hours of agony with only an indifferent midwife who kept telling her to be quiet. She was disturbing the other girls. 3 years since they'd taken him away. She rolled onto her side, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. The fire downstairs had burned low. She could hear wind moving through the pine trees, a sound that should have been peaceful, but wasn't. Clay. She'd named him Clay in her mind, though she'd never been allowed to speak it aloud. Clay because it was simple and strong and made her think of something you could shape with your hands, something that could become whatever it needed to be. The father had been a merchant's son who'd visited the workhouse looking for cheap labor. Pretty words and prettier lies. By the time she realized what had happened, he was long gone, and she was retching into a bucket every morning while the workhouse mistress looked at her with disgust. They'd let her keep Clay for 6 weeks, long enough to feed him, to learn the shape of his face, the sound of his cry, long enough to love him so completely that when they took him away, it felt like they'd reached into her chest and ripped out her lungs. "He'll go to a good family," the mistress had said, already turning away. "Better than anything you could give him." Dulce had screamed until her voice gave out. It hadn't mattered. She'd spent the next 3 years trying to find out where they'd sent him. Asked every new girl who came to the workhouse, every visitor, every delivery man. No one knew, or no one would tell her. Then she'd been put up for auction, and all her desperate searching had to stop because she was here now, on this mountain with a man who'd lost his own child and carried that grief like stones in his pockets. She couldn't tell him, couldn't risk it. What if he thought less of her? What if he sent her back? This was the first place in years where she'd felt even remotely safe, and she couldn't lose that. Not yet. So she kept her secret and tried to sleep and failed at both. Morning came gray and cold. Frost covered everything, turning the world white and brittle. Dulce made coffee with shaking hands, cracked eggs into the pan, burned the bacon because she wasn't paying attention. Cutter came down the stairs looking like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. He sat at the table without speaking, drank his coffee in 3 long swallows, and pushed the burned bacon around his plate without eating it. "I'm sorry," Dulce said quietly. "About yesterday. I shouldn't have—" "Don't." He cut her off. "It's done. We don't talk about it again." She nodded, throat tight. He stood, grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. "I'm riding down to check the trap line. Be back before dark." "Should I— Do you need me to—" "Just keep the fire going. That's all." The door closed behind him. A few minutes later, she heard his horse moving off through the trees, the sound fading until there was nothing but wind and her own breathing. Dulce cleaned up breakfast, fed the chickens, brought in more wood. The work was familiar now, almost comforting, but underneath everything was a restlessness she couldn't shake. Like something was coming, like the quiet couldn't last. She was wrong about when it would break, but not about it breaking. Cutter came back just before sunset, but he wasn't alone. Dulce was on the porch when she heard the horses. 2 of them. She stood shading her eyes against the low sun and felt her heart drop into her stomach. Cutter rode in front. Behind him, sitting on the horse's rump, was a child, a boy, small, dark-haired, maybe 3 years old. Dulce's vision blurred. She gripped the porch railing, certain she was seeing things, that exhaustion and longing had finally broken her mind. But Cutter was dismounting, reaching up to lift the boy down with careful hands. The boy whimpered, pressing his face against Cutter's shoulder. "Dulce," Cutter's voice was rough. "Get some water heating and find something soft for him to eat. Bread, maybe. Nothing too heavy." She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Dulce, sharper now. Did you hear me? Yes. The words scraped out of her throat. Yes, I'll... Water, bread, I'll... She turned and practically ran into the house, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the pump. Water. He needed water. The boy needed water. The boy who couldn't possibly be... who she was imagining, who... Here, Cutter's voice behind her. She spun around. He stood in the kitchen doorway, the boy still in his arms. Up close she could see details. Dirty face, torn shirt, feet bare and bloody. Eyes too big for his face, dark and scared and so familiar. Is there... Dulce's voice cracked. Is there somewhere I can set him down? The rocking chair by the fire. Cutter carried the boy into the main room and settled him gently into the chair. The boy didn't let go of his shirt. It's all right, Cutter murmured. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you. Dulce stood frozen in the doorway, watching as this man who barely spoke used the softest voice she'd ever heard from him. Watching as he carefully unwrapped a blanket from around the boy's shoulders, checking for injuries with hands that knew what to look for. What? She had to stop, swallow. Where did you find him? Trapline. He was just sitting there by one of the snares, like he'd been dropped from the sky. Cutter's jaw was tight. Looks like he's been wandering for a while. Days, maybe. Alone? A child that small? Not wandering by choice, I'd guess. He found a cut on the boy's arm, prodded it gently. The boy whimpered. Someone left him out there. Or he ran from something. Dulce's hands clenched into fists. How could anyone... People do terrible things. Cutter stood, looked at her. Get that water ready. I need to clean these cuts before they fester. She moved on autopilot, heating water, finding clean rags. Her mind was spinning. This couldn't be Clay. Clay would be 3 now, yes, and this boy was about that age, but the odds of... It was impossible. The workhouse had sent her son somewhere far away, to a good family with money and a proper house. Not here. Not to the mountains where he could wander into trap lines and nearly die. But his eyes, the shape of his face, the way he held his mouth when he was scared. She knew those things, had memorized them during 6 desperate weeks 3 years ago. Dulce. Cutter was watching her. The water? Right, sorry. She brought the basin over, set it on the small table beside the chair. Cutter worked in silence, cleaning the boy's cuts with gentle efficiency. The boy didn't cry, just watched with those huge dark eyes, one small hand clutching the arm of the chair. Can you talk? Cutter asked him softly. Can you tell me your name? The boy's mouth opened, closed. Nothing came out. That's all right. You don't have to. Cutter finished bandaging the worst of the cuts. Are you hungry? A tiny nod. Dulce found bread, soaked it in warm milk until it was soft. The boy ate slowly, carefully, like he wasn't sure if the food was real or if someone would take it away. She knelt beside the chair, not too close. What about your mama? She asked quietly. Do you know where she is? The boy's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head. Your papa? Another shake. Anyone at all? He looked down at the half-eaten bread in his hands and said nothing. Cutter stood. He's exhausted. We should let him sleep. I can make up a pallet by the fire for tonight. No. The word came out harder than Dulce intended. No, he can have my bed. I'll sleep down here. Cutter's eyebrows rose. Your room? He needs a real bed, and quiet, and... She stopped herself before her voice broke completely. Please, Deet. Something shifted in Cutter's expression. He studied her face for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw there, wondered if her secret was written plainly enough for him to read. All right, he said finally. We'll put him in your room. Between them, they got the boy upstairs. He was so light, so small. Dulce had to fight the urge to clutch him tight, to never let go. She helped him into the bed, pulled the blankets up to his chin. You're safe, she whispered, brushing hair back from his forehead. I promise. You're safe here. The boy's eyes were already closing. Within seconds, he was asleep. Dulce stood there for a long time, just watching him breathe. Cutter waited in the hallway. When she finally came out, pulling the door mostly closed behind her, He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "You want to tell me what that was about?" he asked. What was about?" "The way you're looking at him. Like he's—" He stopped. "Like you know him." "I don't." The lie tasted bitter. I know what it's like. Being that age and that scared, that's all." Cutter's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe her. She could see it in his face. But after a moment, he just nodded. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll sleep on the rocking chair in case he wakes up." "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. I brought him here. He's my responsibility now." "Our responsibility," Dulce wanted to say. But she didn't have the right to claim that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She went downstairs and tried to sleep on the couch, but every sound from above had her sitting up, listening. Was he crying? Was he scared? Did he need her? Around midnight, she heard footsteps. Cutter's, heavy and deliberate. Going into her room. A long pause, then coming back out, going to his own room, checking on the boy, making sure he was all right. Dulce closed her eyes and felt something warm and painful expand in her chest. The next morning, the boy was still asleep when Cutter came downstairs. He looked terrible, gray-faced, exhausted, but he started the coffee without complaint. "I need to ride into town," he said without preamble. "See if anyone's reported a missing child." Dulce's blood went cold. "Town? They'll take him. If someone's looking for him, they have a right to know he's alive. And if no one's looking, if they threw him away like—" She stopped herself. Cutter turned to face her fully. "Like what?" She looked away. "Nothing. I don't trust them. The people in Copperbend. You said yourself I don't trust them either, but I have to check." His voice softened slightly. "If it was my daughter out there, I'd want someone to check." That shut her up, because he was right, and she knew it, and it made her want to scream. "Fine," she said, "but I'm staying here with him. I wouldn't have it any other way." He left an hour later. Dulce watched from the porch until he disappeared into the trees, then went back inside to find the boy standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking lost. "Hey," she said softly, crouching down to his level. "Are you hungry?" A small nod. She made him more bread and milk, watched as he ate slowly. His hands were steadier this morning, but his eyes still held that wariness, like he expected the world to hurt him. "Can you tell me your name yet?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Clay." The room tilted. Dulce gripped the edge of the table, fighting to keep her face neutral, fighting not to grab him, and never let go. "Clay," she repeated. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. That's a good name." He went back to eating. It could be coincidence. Clay wasn't an uncommon name. And she'd only thought it, never said it aloud, so there was no way this boy could actually— But his face, the way he held his spoon, the small birthmark on his wrist that she could see now that his sleeve had ridden up. She'd kissed that birthmark 100 times during those 6 weeks. "Clay," she said carefully, "do you remember anything about before? Where you lived?" He shook his head, but his eyes slid away, lying or trying to forget. "It's okay. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." They sat in silence while he finished eating. Then he looked up at her with those dark eyes that were so much like her own and asked, "Are you nice?" The question broke her. "I'm going to try to be," she whispered. "I promise I'm going to try." He seemed to accept that. "The man with the scars. Is he nice too?" "Yes. He's very nice. He just doesn't show it the same way other people do." "Oh." Clay thought about this. "My other mama wasn't nice." Dulce's breath caught. "Your other mama?" "The one before. She yelled a lot, and she—" He stopped, small face crumpling. "It's okay." Dulce reached out slowly, carefully, and touched his hand. "You don't have to tell me. Not until you're ready." He didn't pull away from her touch. That felt like a victory. They spent the morning together. Dulce showed him the chickens, let him scatter feed while she collected eggs. She pointed out the different plants in the garden, the ones you could eat and the ones you couldn't. She told him stories about the mountain, making up the parts she didn't know, and he listened like every word mattered. He was so small, so fragile, so clearly hers. By the time Cutter returned late that afternoon, Dulce had made up her mind. She didn't care about the odds or logic or what was possible. This was her son. Somehow, impossibly, he'd found his way back to her. And she was never letting him go again. Cutter's face when he came through the door told her everything she needed to know before he said a word. "What did you find out?" she asked. He glanced at Clay, who was playing with wooden blocks by the fire, lowered his voice. "No one's reported a missing child. But there's talk about a woman from over the ridge who took in orphans, worked them hard, beat them if they didn't produce enough." Dulce felt sick. "And? She's gone. Left town 2 weeks ago, and no one knows where. Took most of the children with her, but..." He paused. "Rumor is she left the youngest ones behind. Said they were more trouble than they were worth." She abandoned them? "That's what I'm hearing. Sheriff's supposed to be looking into it, but you know how that goes." Cutter's expression was grim. "Found 3 children already, all under 5, all half-starved and terrified. Clay, left behind because he was too small, too young, too much trouble." "What's going to happen to them?" Dulce asked. "Orphanage in Silver Creek, probably. If they're lucky. Workhouse if they're not." No, she couldn't let that happen. Not again. What if... She had to stop, gather her courage. "What if he stayed here?" Cutter went still. "Here. With us. We have room. We have food. And he's so small, and he's been through so much, and I..." Her voice was shaking. She couldn't control it. Please don't send him away." Cutter looked at Clay, then back at her. "This isn't some stray dog you can just keep, Dulce. There are laws, procedures." "I know. But you said yourself the sheriff doesn't care. And no one's looking for him, and..." She was begging now, didn't care. "Please, I'll work harder. I'll do anything. Just let him stay." "Why?" The question was gentle but insistent. "Why does this matter so much to you?" She looked at Clay, at his dark hair and dark eyes and the way he held his mouth, at the birthmark on his wrist, at everything she'd lost and miraculously found again. "Because he's mine," she whispered. Cutter's expression shifted. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. "Yours. They took him from me 3 years ago. At the workhouse. Said he'd go to a good family. I didn't know. I never knew where..." The words came faster now, tumbling over each other. "I thought I'd never see him again. And then you brought him here, and his name is Clay. I named him Clay, and that's what he told me this morning. And I know it sounds impossible, but I know my own child. I know him." The silence stretched between them. Cutter's face was unreadable. "Please," Dulce said again, "don't take him from me twice." Cutter walked over to where Clay sat, crouched down beside him. "Hey, Clay, can I ask you something?" The boy looked up, wary. "That lady who had you before, did she ever tell you about your mama? Your real one?" Clay's face scrunched up in thought. "She said my mama didn't want me. Said I was a mistake." Dulce made a sound like she'd been punched. "Well, that lady was wrong," Cutter said firmly. "Dead wrong, you understand?" Clay nodded uncertainly. Cutter stood, turned to Dulce. His face was still hard to read, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost like pain, like understanding. "He stays," Cutter said. Dulce nearly collapsed with relief. Thank you. But we do this right. I'll go back to town tomorrow, file papers saying I'm taking responsibility for an abandoned child. Give my name as guardian." "Not mine?" "You're 17, bought at auction. You think they'll let you claim a child?" He shook his head. "No, it has to be me. Legally, he'll be mine, but..." He paused. "But we both know the truth. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than she dared hope for." "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." That night she sat by Clay's bed, her bed, but his now, and watched him sleep. She wanted to tell him, wanted to say the words out loud. "I'm your mother. I never stopped looking for you. I love you more than anything in this world." But he'd been through so much, had been told his mother didn't want him, Pushing too hard too fast might break the fragile trust they'd started building. So she just sat there, holding his small hand, promising herself that one day, soon, she'd find the right words. Cutter appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything, just watched her watch the boy. "I need to tell you something," Dulce said quietly. "I figured." She took a breath. "His father was a merchant's son. I was 16. Stupid. He said things and I believed them, and then he was gone." Her throat tightened. "The workhouse let me keep Clay for 6 weeks. Then they took him. Told me it was better this way, that I couldn't give him the life he deserved." "That's horseshit," Cutter said flatly. "Maybe. But I believed it for a long time." She looked down at Clay's sleeping face. "I stopped believing it the day they put me on that auction block, because I realized that all those proper people in their proper houses didn't care about me or him or anyone who didn't fit into their perfect little world." Cutter moved into the room, sat on the floor with his back against the wall. "You could have told me when I first brought him here." "I was scared, thought you'd, I don't know, think less of me for having a child, for wanting him back." He shook his head. "I lost my daughter. You think I'd judge someone for fighting to keep theirs?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the grief he carried, the guilt, the weight of all the things he couldn't save. And she understood something then. Cutter hadn't bought her at that auction just because he needed help. He'd bought her because somewhere deep down, he'd seen another broken thing and wanted to give it a chance to heal. Just like she was trying to heal now, with her son sleeping peacefully beside her. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He nodded, stood to leave, paused at the door. "Dulce?" "Yeah?" "We're going to have to be careful. Town's already suspicious about me. Add a child to the mix, questions will get asked." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that end with sheriffs and courts and people deciding what's best without asking us." His face was grim. "We keep him close. Don't let him wander. And if anyone asks, he's mine. An orphan I took in out of whatever reason sounds believable." "And me? You're the help. Nothing more." He met her eyes. "I know it's not fair, but it's the only way this works." She understood. In the eyes of Copperbend, she was property, bought and paid for. She had no rights, no standing. The only protection Clay had was Cutter's name and Cutter's reputation, fearsome as it was. "Okay," she agreed, "whatever it takes." The next few weeks passed in a strange, fragile peace. Cutter rode to town and filed the papers, claiming Clay as a ward. The sheriff raised eyebrows but didn't object. Orphans were a burden on the county. If Cutter wanted to take one on, that was his business. Clay slowly came out of his shell. He followed Dulce everywhere, a small shadow at her heels. He helped feed the chickens, though they scared him at first. He picked vegetables in the garden, his small hands careful with the plants. At night, he'd sit between Dulce and Cutter by the fire, listening to stories. Dulce hadn't told him yet. Every day she thought about it, and every day she chickened out. What if he didn't believe her? What if he pulled away? What if... But Clay seemed to know anyway, and that way children sometimes do. He started calling her Mama Dulce on his own, shyly at first, then with more confidence when she didn't correct him. And Cutter, he was different with the boy around. Softer. He taught Clay to stack wood properly, to recognize animal tracks, to whittle small shapes from pine branches. He was patient in a way that spoke of practice, of a little girl he'd once taught the same things. It almost felt like a family. Then one afternoon, a rider came up the mountain trail. Dulce was hanging laundry when she heard the horse. She turned, shading her eyes, and felt her stomach drop. It was a man she didn't recognize. Well-dressed, clean. He sat his horse like someone used to being in charge. Cutter came out of the shed, his face going hard. "Help you with something?" The man dismounted, tied his horse. "Ephraim Cutter?" "That's right. Name's William Garrett. I'm a federal marshal out of Denver." He pulled a badge from his coat, showed it. "I'm looking for a child, half-Indian boy, about 3 years old. Got word he might be up this way." Dulce felt the world tilt. Half-Indian. Clay wasn't just hers, he was... "Don't know anything about that," Cutter said flatly. "No? Because I got paperwork here says you filed to take in an abandoned child 2 weeks back." Garrett pulled out a folded document. Sheriff in Copperbend mentioned it. Thought I should check. Lots of abandoned children around these days. Doesn't mean they're the one you're looking for. Mind if I see him, just to be sure? Actually, I do mind. Cutter crossed his arms. You got a warrant? Garrett's smile was thin. I can get one. Then get one. Until then, you're trespassing on my property. They stared at each other. Dulce stood frozen by the clothesline, a wet shirt clutched in her hands, barely breathing. There's a bounty, Garrett said conversationally. $200 for the boy's safe return. Seems his mother wants him back real bad. His mother abandoned him, Cutter said coldly. Not according to her. She says the child was stolen, along with 6 others from her care. Garrett pulled out another paper. Got a legal claim right here, filed with the territorial government and everything. Dulce's mind was racing. Half Indian. A mother looking for him. A bounty. This wasn't about her at all. Clay's real mother, his birth mother, was looking for him. And Dulce had no claim, no rights, nothing but 6 weeks 3 years ago and a name she'd whispered in the dark. I need to think about this, Cutter said. Think fast. I'll be back in 3 days with that warrant. Garrett mounted his horse. And Cutter, if you try to run with the boy, I'll hunt you down. That's a promise. He rode away, disappearing down the trail. Cutter stood perfectly still until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then he turned to Dulce. Inside, now. She followed him into the cabin. Clay was upstairs napping. They kept their voices low. Did you know? Cutter asked. Know what? That he was half Indian? No, the father, he was white. Dark-haired, but white. I never... Stopped. Wait, if his father was white, then how... Understanding hit them both at the same time. The workhouse, Dulce whispered. They lied. They told me they were sending him to a good family, but they gave him to someone else, sold him maybe, or switched him with another child. Cutter's face was grim. 6 weeks old, all babies look alike. Easy enough to swap one for another if you're not paying attention. Dulce felt like she was going to be sick. So Clay, the Clay sleeping upstairs, he's not mine. Biologically, probably not. Cutter's voice was gentle. But does that matter? Did it? She thought of the past few weeks, teaching Clay to gather eggs, reading him stories, tucking him in at night, the way he looked at her with trust in his eyes, the way he called her Mama Dulce without hesitation. No, she said, it doesn't matter. He's mine anyway. Then we have a problem, because there's a woman out there with a legal claim and a federal marshal willing to enforce it. What do we do? Cutter was quiet for a long moment. Then, we fight. I claim him as my own. Say I found him abandoned, filed the papers in good faith. Let them prove otherwise. But the marshal said, I don't care what the marshal said. That boy's been through hell. I'm not handing him over to someone who might just be after the bounty. His jaw set. We do this right. Legal. Public. Force them to make their case. And if they do, then we deal with it. He looked at her. Together. That night, Dulce held Clay a little tighter when she put him to bed. He was sleepy, warm, trusting. He had no idea what was coming. Mama Dulce? He mumbled. Yeah, baby? Are you going to leave me too? Her heart cracked. Never. I promise. I'm never leaving you. He smiled and closed his eyes. She sat there until he was fully asleep, then went downstairs to find Cutter staring into the fire. We need a plan, she said. I know. What if his real mother? What if she really does want him back? What if she's good? What if... Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Cutter's voice was firm. But until I see proof, until I talk to this woman myself, I'm not handing over a child who was left to die in the woods. 3 days felt like 3 hours. They passed in a blur of normal activities that felt anything but normal. Clay sensed something was wrong, got clingy. Dulce let him. Cutter started wearing his gun again, something he hadn't done since she'd arrived. On the 3rd day, the marshal came back. This time he wasn't alone. Marshal Garrett rode at the front, his badge catching the afternoon sun. Behind him came Sheriff Dobbs and 3 deputies Dulce didn't recognize. Behind them, a wagon driven by a thin man in a black suit who looked like an undertaker or a lawyer, maybe both. Cutter stood on the porch, one hand resting on the post, the other near his gun. He hadn't drawn it, not yet. Dulce stayed in the doorway with Clay pressed against her legs, his small fingers twisted in her skirt. She could feel him shaking. "Mr. Cutter," Garrett called out, reining his horse to a stop. "I've got that warrant we discussed." "Let's see it." Garrett pulled a folded paper from his coat and urged his horse forward. Cutter came down the porch steps to meet him, took the document, read it slowly. His jaw worked as his eyes moved down the page. "This says you have authority to search the premises and remove any minor children found within." "That's right. Doesn't say anything about this specific child. Could be any child." "Don't play games, Cutter. We both know there's only one child up here." Garrett's voice hardened. "Now, are you going to cooperate, or do we have to do this the hard way?" Cutter looked up from the warrant. "Who's the woman claiming him?" "Her name's Nalia Whitewater. She's been living over in the Canyon settlements. Says 7 children were taken from her care 3 months back. We've recovered 4. This boy matches the description of one of the missing 3. Description could fit a lot of children. Half Arapaho, half white. Dark eyes, birthmark on his left wrist shaped like a crescent moon." Garrett's eyes flicked to Clay. "Want me to check?" Dulce's hand moved instinctively to cover Clay's wrist, but it was too late. The birthmark was visible where his sleeve had ridden up. Cutter's face went carefully blank. "What proof does this woman have that he's hers?" "She's got papers, birth records from the reservation, witness statements." The marshal's tone softened slightly. "Look, I know you filed papers in good faith. Nobody's saying you did anything wrong, but the law's clear. If this is her child, he goes back to her. And if she's lying, if she's just after the bounty, then that'll come out at the hearing." "What hearing?" "Territorial judge is coming through Copperbend next week. He'll hear both sides, make a determination." Garrett shifted in his saddle. "In the meantime, the boy stays in protective custody." "Like hell he does." Cutter's voice dropped to something dangerous. "That child was half dead when I found him. Abandoned, left to die in the woods. You want me to hand him over to someone who might have done that?" "The woman says her children were stolen, not abandoned." "Then let her prove it at the hearing. Until then, he stays with me." Sheriff Dobbs spurred his horse forward. "Now listen here, Cutter. You can't just— This is my land, Dobbs. I filed legal papers. That boy is under my guardianship until a court says otherwise. The warrant says you can search, so search. But you're not taking him anywhere without a direct order from a judge." The deputies started to dismount. Cutter's hand moved to his gun. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. Everyone froze. Dulce felt her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Clay whimpered and pressed harder against her legs. "Cutter," Garrett said carefully, "you pull that gun, this ends badly for everyone." "I'm not pulling anything, just making sure you boys remember whose property you're on. We have a legal warrant, and I have legal guardianship. Seems we're at an impasse." The thin man in the wagon finally spoke up. "Perhaps I can offer a solution." His voice was reedy, officious. "I'm Edmund Price, territorial attorney. Mr. Cutter, if you're willing to bring the child to the hearing next week, the court can make its determination then. No need for unpleasantness." Cutter studied him. "And until then?" "The child remains in your care, provided you give your word you won't attempt to leave the territory." "My word's good. Then we have an agreement." Price pulled out a ledger, made a notation. "The hearing is set for Tuesday, 10 o'clock, at the courthouse in Copperbend. Both parties will present their cases. The judge will decide." Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but after a long moment he nodded. "Fine. Tuesday. But Cutter, if you run, I will find you." "I'm not running from anything." The marshal and his men turned their horses and rode back down the trail. The lawyer's wagon followed. Only Sheriff Dobbs lingered, his face twisted with something that might have been concern or might have been satisfaction. "You're making a mistake," he said to Cutter. "Wouldn't be my first. That woman's got rights, law's on her side. We'll see what the judge says." Dobbs spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Just remember, I tried to warn you." He rode off after the others. Cutter stood in the yard until the sounds of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he turned back to the cabin, climbed the steps, and sat heavily on the porch bench. "What do we do?" Dulce asked. "We go to the hearing, present our case." "What case?" "She's his mother. She has papers. We have, what? A warrant for an abandoned child and your signature? We have the truth. That he was left to die, that we saved him, that he's safe and fed and cared for. Cutter's voice was rough. That has to count for something. Clay tugged on Dulce's skirt. Mama Dulce? Who were those men? She knelt down, forced a smile she didn't feel. Just some people from town, baby. Nothing to worry about. Are they going to take me away? No. The word came out fierce, absolute. No, they're not, I promise. She met Cutter's eyes over Clay's head. He gave the smallest nod, but she could see the doubt there. The fear that her promise was one she couldn't keep. The days before the hearing crawled past like wounded animals. Cutter rode to town twice, came back tight-lipped and angry. He wouldn't say what he'd learned, just disappeared into the shed and worked until his hands bled. Dulce tried to maintain normalcy for Clay's sake. They fed the chickens, weeded the garden, read stories by the fire. But the boy wasn't stupid. He knew something was wrong, started having nightmares again, waking up crying and calling for her. It's okay, she'd whisper, holding him close. I'm here. You're safe. But she was lying, and they both knew it. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. Frost covered the ground and the sky threatened snow. Cutter hitched up the wagon in silence, while Dulce dressed Clay in the cleanest clothes they had. Her hands shook as she buttoned his shirt. We're going for a ride, she told him. Into town. Remember what we talked about? Clay nodded solemnly. I have to be good. And quiet. And not talk to strangers. That's right, baby. She kissed his forehead. And no matter what happens, remember that Mama Dulce loves you, okay? Okay. The ride down the mountain took 3 hours. Nobody spoke. Clay sat between them on the wagon bench, his small hand gripping Dulce's. Cutter's face could have been carved from stone. Copper Bend looked different from the last time Dulce had seen it. Bigger crowds. More noise. Word of the hearing had spread, and it seemed like half the territory had shown up to watch. They drove straight to the courthouse, a 2-story brick building that dominated the main square. People stared as they passed, whispered, pointed. Ignore them, Cutter muttered. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Every bench filled, people standing along the walls. The air was thick with body heat and anticipation. A judge sat at the front, elderly, white-haired, wearing robes that had seen better days. Edmund Price stood near the judge's bench, papers in hand, and on the other side of the room, near the front, sat a woman. Dulce saw her and felt something twist in her chest. She was beautiful. Not in a delicate way, but in a way that spoke of strength and survival. Dark skin, darker eyes, black hair braided down her back. She wore traditional clothing mixed with white woman's dress, a leather vest over a simple cotton skirt, beadwork at her throat and wrists. She sat perfectly straight, her face composed, but her hands were clenched tight in her lap. This was Nalia Whitewater, Clay's mother, his real mother. Cutter led them to a bench near the back. Clay pressed close to Dulce, his eyes wide as he took in the crowd. The judge, the woman who might take him away. All rise, a bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Samuel Thornton presiding. Everyone stood. The judge banged his gavel. Be seated. We're here today to determine custody of a minor child. He consulted his papers. One Clay Whitewater, approximately 3 years of age. The claimant is Nalia Whitewater, mother. The respondent is Ephraim Cutter, current guardian. Mr. Price, proceed. The lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. Mrs. Whitewater's son was stolen from her home 3 months ago, along with 6 other children in her care. She has birth records, witness statements, and physical evidence proving her claim. Mr. Cutter, while acting in good faith, has no legal right to the child. Mr. Cutter? The judge looked their direction. Do you have representation? Cutter stood. No, Your Honor, can't afford it. Then you'll speak for yourself. What's your response to these claims? I found the boy abandoned in the woods, half-starved and injured. I filed papers with the sheriff, taking legal guardianship. I've cared for him, fed him, protected him. As far as I'm concerned, that makes him mine. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Mrs. Whitewater, please approach. Nalia stood and walked to the front with grace that made the crowd quiet. She didn't look at Cutter or Dulce. Her eyes stayed fixed on the judge. Tell the court your story, Thornton said. Her voice was clear, accented, but firm. 3 months ago, men came to my home in the night. White men. They took my children, 7 of them. Some were mine by blood. Others I cared for. Orphans from the reservation. Children whose parents died in the fever. I raised them all the same.
Why would someone take them? There are people who think Indian children should not be raised by Indians, that we are not fit. There are schools, government schools, that pay bounties for children to fill their classrooms. And there are worse places. Work camps. Brothels. Her voice didn't waver, but her hands clenched tighter. I have been searching ever since. I found 4. 3 are still missing. And you believe this child is one of those 3?
I know he is. His name is Clay. I named him myself for the red earth of the canyon where he was born. He has a birthmark on his left wrist. His father was a white trapper who died before Clay was born. I have papers proving all of this. Price stepped forward with a folder. Birth record from the reservation agent, Your Honor. Witness statements from tribal elders. And a description matching the child in question. The judge took the papers, read them slowly. These appear in order. Mr. Cutter, do you dispute that this child has the described birthmark? Cutter's jaw worked. No, Your Honor. Then it seems clear the child is... Permission to speak, Your Honor. Dulce stood without thinking, her voice cutting through the courtroom. Everyone turned to stare. Cutter grabbed her arm. Dulce, don't... She shook him off. I have something to say. Judge Thornton frowned. And you are? Dulce May. I work for Mr. Cutter, but I know this child. I've cared for him. This isn't the time for... Please. She moved forward, pushing past Cutter, past the benches, until she stood near the front. Please, Your Honor. I know I don't have any legal standing. I'm nobody. But that boy, Clay, he was left in those woods to die. Maybe not by her. She gestured to Nalia. Maybe by the people who took him. But when we found him, he was scared and hurt and alone. Mr. Cutter saved his life. I helped heal him. And now you're going to give him to someone he doesn't even remember? Mrs. Whitewater is his mother, Price said coldly. So am I. The words burst out before Dulce could stop them. Maybe not by blood, maybe not by law, but I've held him when he cried. I've fed him, taught him, loved him. That makes me his mother, too. The courtroom erupted. People shouting, arguing, the judge banging his gavel for order. Through it all, Dulce stood there, shaking, terrified, but unable to take it back. She looked at Nalia for the first time. Really looked at her. The woman's face was unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger. Something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Order! Judge Thornton's voice cracked like thunder. Order in this court, or I'll clear the room. The noise died down. The judge pointed at Dulce. Sit down, miss. You've said your piece. Dulce returned to the bench on shaking legs. Cutter said nothing, but his hand found hers and squeezed hard. This court will take a brief recess, Thornton announced. I need to review these documents. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. The gavel banged again. People started talking immediately. A roar of conversation that made Dulce's head spin. Cutter pulled her and Clay toward the door, pushing through the crowd. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing you've ever done, he muttered. I don't care. Someone had to say it. They made it outside into the cold air. Clay was crying silently, his face pressed against Dulce's shoulder. She held him tight, whispering reassurances she didn't believe. Marshal Garrett appeared beside them. Cutter, a word. Not now. It's important. Garrett's face was grim. There's something you should know about this case, something Price isn't telling you. Cutter turned. I'm listening. The bounty on these kids? It's not from the government. It's from a private party. A man named Jacob Haynes. He runs a labor outfit down south. Mines, mostly. Uses Indian kids because they're cheap and nobody asks questions when they disappear. Dulce felt sick. You're saying... I'm saying Haynes is the one who had those kids stolen, and he's here, in Copperbend. Right now. Garrett glanced over his shoulder. He's got friends on the Territorial Council. Probably paid Price to make sure this goes his way. Why are you telling me this? Cutter asked. Because I signed up to enforce the law, not help some bastard kidnap children for profit. Garrett's voice dropped. If that boy goes back to his mother, Haynes will just take him again.
Maybe take her too, for interfering, you understand? Then what do we do? I don't know, but whatever you're planning, do it fast. The judge is in Haynes's pocket. Garrett walked away before Cutter could respond. They stood there in the cold, Clay between them, the weight of impossible choices pressing down. We could run, Dulce said. Take Clay and disappear into the mountains. They'd hunt us down. You heard, Garrett. This Haynes has money and connections. We wouldn't get far. Then what? Cutter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steel. We make them prove it. Force them to expose Haynes in open court. Show everyone what this is really about. How? I don't know yet, but... He stopped. Where's Clay? Dulce spun around. The space beside her was empty. Clay was gone. Panic hit her like a physical blow. Clay! Clay, where are you? People turned to stare. Cutter started moving, searching the crowd. He was just here. He was right here. Clay! Dulce pushed through the mass of bodies, looking everywhere. The courthouse steps. The street. The alley beside the building. Clay, answer me. Nothing. She ran back to Cutter. We have to find him. We have to. A scream cut through the air. They ran toward the sound, around the side of the courthouse. A small crowd had gathered near the back alley. Dulce shoved her way through and saw Clay standing frozen in the middle of the alley. And facing him, blocking his path, was a man she'd never seen before. Tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes, and a smile that made her skin crawl. Jacob Haynes. Had to be. Well, well, Haynes said, looking down at Clay. There you are, boy. Been looking for you. Cutter moved faster than Dulce had ever seen him move. He grabbed Clay and pulled him back, putting himself between the boy and Haynes. Touch him and I'll break every bone in your body, Cutter said quietly. Haynes laughed. Threatening me in front of witnesses? Bold move, Mountain Man. What do you want? What's mine? That boy represents a significant investment. Haynes's smile widened. But we can negotiate. I'm a reasonable man. Name your price. He's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Haynes pulled out a leather wallet. 200? 5? How much for you to walk away and let this all play out the way it's supposed to? Dulce watched Cutter's hand move to his gun, saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him weighing violence against consequences. You're working with Price, Cutter said instead. You paid him to make sure the woman doesn't get her kids back. Why? So you can take them yourself? I provide labor where it's needed. Those Indian brats would have died on that reservation anyway. At least this way they're useful. They're children. They're property, and soon they'll be my property again. Haynes gestured to someone in the crowd. 4 men stepped forward, big men, armed. Cutter's hand tightened on his gun, but he didn't draw. 4 against 1, with Clay in the middle. The odds were suicide. Smart man, Haynes said. Now, the hearing's about to reconvene. When the judge makes his ruling, and he will rule the right way, I assure you, you're going to hand over that boy without a fuss, understand? And if I don't? Then my friends here will make sure you do, and they won't be gentle about it. Haynes tipped his hat. See you inside, Cutter. He walked away, his men following. The crowd dispersed, leaving Cutter and Dulce and Clay alone in the alley. Clay was sobbing. Dulce picked him up, held him close. It's okay, baby. You're okay. I want to go home, Clay whimpered. I want to go back to the mountain. I know, baby. Cutter's face was ashen. We're out of options. If the judge rules against us, and Haynes's men are waiting, then we fight, Dulce said fiercely. Against 4 armed men, while protecting Clay? We'd die, Dulce, both of us, and he'd end up with Haynes anyway. Then what do you suggest? He didn't answer. There was no good answer. The bell in the courthouse tower rang, calling them back inside. They walked into that courtroom like they were walking to their own execution. The judge was already seated. Price stood ready with his papers. Nalia sat in the same spot, her face still unreadable. And in the back, barely visible in the shadows, stood Jacob Haynes and his men. All parties present? Judge Thornton asked. Good. I've reviewed the evidence. It's clear that... The courthouse door slammed open. Marshal Garrett strode in, and he wasn't alone. Behind him came a man in a cavalry uniform, an army captain by his insignia, and behind him a half-dozen soldiers. Sorry to interrupt, Your Honor, Garrett said, not sounding sorry at all. But this hearing needs to stop, right now.
Price sputtered. You have no authority to— Actually, I do. The captain stepped forward. Captain James Mitchell, United States Army. I have a federal warrant for the arrest of Jacob Haynes on charges of kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy to violate the Indian Appropriations Act. Every head in the courtroom turned toward Haynes. The man had gone pale, but he didn't run, didn't move. This is absurd, he said smoothly. I'm a legitimate businessman. I have no idea what— We have testimony from 4 of the recovered children, Mitchell continued, all stating they were taken by men in your employ. We have financial records showing payments to known kidnappers, and we have a very cooperative Mr. Price here. He gestured to the lawyer, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the bench. Who's willing to testify that you bribed him to sabotage this hearing? That's a lie, Price shouted. Is it? Then explain the $1,000 we found in your office. Matched the serial numbers on bills withdrawn from Haynes's bank account last week. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Haynes made a break for the door. His men tried to follow. The soldiers moved to intercept. Gunshots rang out. Dulce screamed and dove to the floor, covering Clay with her body. Cutter threw himself over both of them, shielding them as best he could. The gunfight lasted maybe 30 seconds. When it ended, 2 of Haynes's men were down, bleeding. The other 2 had their hands up. Haynes himself was on his knees, a soldier's rifle pressed to the back of his head. Everyone stay calm, Mitchell shouted. This is over. Slowly, people started getting up. Dulce lifted her head, checking Clay for injuries. He was terrified but unhurt. Cutter was bleeding from his arm where a bullet had grazed him, but he waved off her concern. I'm fine. Check the boy. Judge Thornton banged his gavel with shaking hands. This hearing is— I need a moment. Your Honor? Nalia's voice cut through the chaos. She stood, calm as still water despite everything. May I speak? Yes, of course. She walked to the center of the room, looked at Haynes being dragged away, then turned to face the judge. I came here to get my son back, and I will take him. He is mine, by blood and by love. Her eyes moved to Dulce. But I see that he has been cared for, protected, loved by others too. Dulce couldn't breathe. This woman, Nalia gestured to her, she called herself his mother. In my language, we have a word for this. For someone who loves a child not born to them but chosen. Someone who stands beside the birth mother, who shares the burden and the joy. She spoke a word in her own language, something beautiful and complicated. It means second mother, Nalia continued. And if she is willing, if she will accept, then she and I will raise this boy together. Both mothers, both families. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Dulce stared at this woman, this stranger who had every right to hate her, to take Clay and disappear and never look back. And instead she was offering partnership, family. Dulce's voice cracked. Yes, if you'll have me. Nalia smiled, small and sad. Then we have a lot to talk about. But first, she looked at the judge. Is my son free to come home? Thornton looked at the wreckage of his courtroom, at the soldiers hauling away prisoners, at the blood on the floor. Yes, take your son. This hearing is over. Nalia held out her hand to Clay. He looked up at Dulce, uncertain. It's okay, Dulce whispered, even though it wasn't, even though her heart was breaking. She's your mama too. Go on. Clay walked slowly to Nalia. She knelt down, opened her arms, and he fell into them. Watching them together hurt more than Dulce expected, but it also felt right in a way she couldn't explain. Cutter's hand found hers, squeezed once, held on. Outside, snow had started to fall, the first of winter, covering Copperbend in white. The snow fell heavier as they stood outside the courthouse. Dulce watched Nalia hold Clay, watched the boy's small hands grip his birth mother's vest, and felt something inside her chest threatening to crack wide open. Around them, the crowd dispersed slowly, people talking in hushed voices about what they'd witnessed. The gunfight, the arrests, the Indian woman claiming her stolen son. Cutter's arm was still bleeding through his sleeve. Dulce tore a strip from her own skirt without thinking, wrapped it tight around the wound. He didn't protest, just watched her with those gray eyes that saw too much. We should get you to a doctor, she said. It's nothing. I've had worse. That's not the point.
Nalia approached them, Clay still in her arms. Up close, Dulce could see the exhaustion in her face, the lines around her eyes that spoke of months of searching, of grief, of fear that she'd never find her children. I mean what I said, Nalia told Dulce quietly, about raising him together. But we need to talk, really talk. Not here. Where?
I'm staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street, room 7. Tomorrow morning? Her eyes moved to Cutter. You should come too. This concerns all of us. Cutter nodded. We'll be there. Nalia turned to go, then stopped. Your name? You said Dulce May? Yes, ma'am. My son. When he first spoke to you, what did he call you? Dulce's throat tightened. Mama Dulce.
Something flickered across Nalia's face. Pain, maybe. Or understanding. He has good instincts. He knows who loves him. She shifted Clay to her other hip. Tomorrow. Early. She walked away through the falling snow, and Dulce had to physically restrain herself from running after them, from begging for just a few more minutes with the boy who'd become hers without ever really being hers at all. Come on, Cutter said gently. Let's get out of this cold. They found a room at a different boarding house, one that didn't ask questions. Cutter paid extra for hot water and privacy. Dulce cleaned his wound properly, revealing a deep graze that probably needed stitches but would have to make do with bandages and hope. You should have moved faster, she muttered, wrapping clean cloth around his arm. I was covering you in Clay. You could have been killed. So could you. He caught her hand, stopped her fussing. We're both alive. That's what matters. She pulled away, paced to the window. Outside, Copperbend was turning white under the snow. Somewhere out there, Nalia was putting Clay to bed in a strange room, maybe singing to him in a language Dulce didn't understand, telling him stories about a home he didn't remember. I thought I could keep him, Dulce said to the window. I actually thought, you still can, just not the way you expected. She's his real mother. She has every right to, and you're the one who kept him alive for weeks, who made him feel safe, who loved him when he needed it most. Cutter stood, moved beside her. That counts for something. Nalia knows it. That's why she wants to talk. What if she changes her mind? What if she decides she doesn't want me around, doesn't want to share? Then we deal with it, but I don't think she will. How can you be sure?
Because I saw her face when you called yourself his mother. She didn't look angry. She looked relieved. He paused. Raising a child alone is hard. Raising one when you're Indian in white territory is harder. She's offering you partnership because she needs it as much as you do. Dulce wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this impossible situation might somehow work out, but trust was a muscle she'd never learned to use properly. That night, she dreamed of Clay reaching for her, calling her name, and her arms empty no matter how far she stretched. Morning came gray and cold. They dressed in silence, ate a tasteless breakfast at the boarding house, and walked through snow-covered streets to 3rd Street. The boarding house there was nicer than theirs. 2 stories, painted white, with actual curtains in the windows. Room 7 was on the 2nd floor. Dulce knocked, her heart hammering. Nalia opened the door. Behind her, Clay sat on the bed playing with a carved wooden horse. He looked up when he saw Dulce and smiled. Mama Dulce! He scrambled off the bed and ran to her. She caught him, held him tight, breathed in the smell of his hair. Hey, baby, did you sleep okay? Uh-huh. Mama Nalia told me a story about a coyote who thought he was smart but wasn't. Mama Nalia. The words should have hurt, but somehow they didn't. There was room in Clay's world for 2 mothers. Dulce was starting to believe there might be room in hers too. Come in, Nalia said, please. The room was small but clean. A bed, a chair, a table by the window. Nalia had spread papers across the table, documents, maps, letters. She gestured for them to sit. Clay, can you play over there for a bit? Nalia asked gently. The grown-ups need to talk. Okay. He took his wooden horse and settled on the bed, making quiet galloping sounds. Nalia sat across from Dulce and Cutter. In the daylight, Dulce could see her more clearly. Younger than she'd first appeared, maybe 25, maybe less. Hands calloused from work, a scar along her jaw that spoke of violence survived. First, I need to understand something, Nalia said. How did you come to have my son? Dulce told her everything. The workhouse, the pregnancy, the 6 weeks before Clay was taken, the years of searching, the auction, finding the boy, or a different boy who somehow became hers anyway. Nalia listened without interrupting. When Dulce finished, she nodded slowly. So you thought he was yours, the child you lost? Yes, I know it sounds like grief and hope, both together. Nalia's voice was soft. I understand that. When they took my children, I thought I would die from it. 3 months of searching, finding them one by one, never knowing if the next one would be alive or... She stopped. You gave him safety when he had none. That matters. But he's yours, Dulce said, by blood and by right. I have no claim. You have the claim of love. That's not nothing. Nalia pulled one of the papers toward her. This is Clay's birth record. He was born in the Canyon Settlement, winter of 23. His father was a trapper named John Weaver. White man, good man. He died in a rock slide before Clay was born. She pulled out another paper. This is testimony from the people who saw my children taken. 5 men, all white, all armed. They came at night, took the 7 youngest, left me tied to a post in my own home while they burned half my things looking for papers, birth records, anything that proved the children were mine. Why? Cutter asked. Because children without papers are easier to take, easier to sell, easier to make disappear. Nalia's jaw tightened. Haynes runs a network. He targets Indian families, mixed families, anyone vulnerable, takes the children, ships them to work camps or worse. I've been tracking him for 3 months. The marshal didn't care until I brought proof he couldn't ignore. How many has he taken? Dulce asked. That I know of? 47 children in the last 2 years. How many total? She shook her head. No one's counting. The number hit Dulce like a physical blow. 47 stolen childhoods. 47 families destroyed. And now he's in custody, Cutter said. Will it stick? Captain Mitchell says yes. They have evidence, witnesses. Haynes will stand trial. Nalia's smile was grim. But his network is bigger than one man. There are others doing the same work. The fight doesn't end here. What will you do? Dulce asked. After you get your children back? I'm taking them home, back to the canyon. It's remote enough that we should be safe. She paused. I want you to come with us. Dulce blinked. What? You and Mr. Cutter both. I need help. The children are traumatized. They need stability, care, people they can trust. You've proven you can provide that. I'm nobody. I don't know how to... You know how to love a frightened child. That's more than most people manage. Nalia looked at Cutter. And you know how to protect them. I saw you in that courtroom. You were ready to die for Clay. Still am, Cutter said simply. Then come. Help me build something safe. A place where stolen children can heal. Nalia's voice grew stronger. I can't do it alone. I've tried. But with help, with people who understand what these children have been through, we could actually make a difference. Dulce looked at Cutter. He met her eyes and she saw the answer there before he spoke. What about my cabin? He asked. My land? Keep it. Use it as a refuge if the canyon becomes unsafe. But live with us for a while. Let us try this. Nalia's eyes moved between them. I know it's asking a lot. Trusting strangers. Changing your whole life. But yes, Dulce interrupted. Yes, I'll come. Cutter nodded. Me too. Something like relief washed over Nalia's face. Thank you, both of you. Clay looked up from his wooden horse. Are we all staying together? Yes, baby, Dulce told him. We're going to be a family, a big, complicated, messy family. Okay. He went back to playing like it was the simplest thing in the world. Maybe for him it was. They spent the rest of the morning making plans. Nalia had secured the release of 3 more children, siblings ages 5, 7, and 9. They were staying at the mission house, traumatized and silent. There was also talk of a 4th child found 2 towns over, but the authorities were being difficult about releasing her. I'll handle it, Cutter said. I know some people. If pressure needs applying, I can apply it. Nalia smiled. I believe you. They talked logistics. The Canyon settlement was a 3-day ride south. Nalia had a wagon and supplies but needed help transporting the children.
Some were too young to ride, too scared to travel. It would be slow going, especially in the snow. We could use my cabin as a midpoint, Cutter suggested. Stock it with food and blankets. Make it a safe stop if we need to break the journey. That would help? Thank you.
Dulce listened to them plan, watched the way Nalia's shoulders slowly relaxed as she realized she wasn't alone anymore. Watched Cutter lean forward, engaged in a way she'd never seen him, already thinking 3 steps ahead about routes and safety and what the children would need. This was really happening. They were really doing this. I should tell you something, Dulce said suddenly, about the workhouse, about what happened to my son, my birth son. Nalia looked at her. You don't have to. I want to. Dulce took a breath. They told me he went to a good family, a merchant and his wife who couldn't have children. I believed it for years. But what if that was a lie too? What if he ended up like Clay, stolen, sold, sent somewhere terrible? Then we'll look for him, Nalia said firmly. What's his name? I don't know. They wouldn't tell me. Just said, her voice cracked. They said I'd never see him again. Do you know what date he was born? March 15th, 3 years ago, at the workhouse in Copperbend. Nalia made a note. I'll ask around. The network of people who do this. They talk to each other, keep records. If your son is out there, if he was taken by someone like Haynes, there might be a trail. Hope and fear warred in Dulce's chest. What if we find him and he doesn't? What if he doesn't want me? Then he doesn't. But at least you'll know he's alive and safe. That has to be worth something. It was worth everything. Even the possibility, the tiny chance, was more than Dulce had allowed herself to hope for in 3 years. Thank you, she whispered. Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Cutter bought supplies, food, blankets, medicine. Dulce helped Nalia visit the children at the mission house, coaxing them to eat, to speak, to trust even a little bit. The siblings were named Sarah, Thomas, and little Emma. They clung to each other and spoke in whispers when they spoke at all. The 4th child, the one 2 towns over, arrived on the 3rd day. Captain Mitchell brought her himself, riding through the snow with the girl seated in front of him on his horse. She was maybe 6, with tangled blonde hair and eyes that had seen too much. Her name's Charlotte, Mitchell said, dismounting. Found her in a work camp outside Silver Creek. She was the only child there. The rest... He stopped, shook his head. The rest didn't make it. Charlotte didn't speak, didn't cry. Just stood in the snow looking at nothing. Dulce knelt in front of her. Hi, Charlotte. My name's Dulce. Are you hungry? No response. That's okay. You don't have to talk. But we have food inside and it's warm. Would you like to come in? Charlotte's eyes focused on her for the first time. Then slowly she nodded. It was progress. That night, all of them gathered in Nalia's room, the children on the bed, the adults on the floor. Nalia told stories in her language, then translated them. Stories about coyotes and ravens, about brave children who survived impossible things, about families that weren't born but chosen. Clay fell asleep against Dulce's shoulder. Sarah, Thomas, and Emma huddled together under a blanket. Charlotte sat slightly apart, still not speaking, but listening. Tomorrow we leave, Nalia said quietly. It will be hard. The children are scared. The weather is bad. But we'll make it. Together, Cutter added. Together, Nalia agreed. They left Copperbend before dawn. 2 wagons, Cutter's and one Nalia had purchased, loaded with supplies and children. The older kids sat up front with the adults. The younger ones nestled in the back under piles of blankets. The town was still dark as they rolled through the streets. A few people watched from windows, but no one tried to stop them. Word had spread about what happened at the courthouse, about Haynes and his network, about the Indian woman who'd stood up to them and won. Some people in Copperbend were whispering that she was a hero. Others said she was a troublemaker who'd brought shame to the town. Dulce didn't care what they said. They were leaving it all behind. The first day of travel was brutal. Snow made the roads treacherous. The children were restless, scared. Emma cried for hours. Thomas kept asking if the bad men were following them. Charlotte still hadn't spoken a word. They made camp that night in a clearing Cutter knew, building a fire that seemed too small against the vast darkness of the mountains. Dulce made soup from salt pork and vegetables, stretching it to feed everyone. The children ate in silence. Nalia sat beside Dulce by the fire.
You're good with them. I'm trying. I don't always know what to say. Nobody does. But you show up. You try. That's what matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children settle under blankets in the wagon beds. Cutter stood guard at the edge of the clearing, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness. Can I ask you something? Dulce said. About Clay. About what happened when they took him. Nalia's face hardened. What do you want to know? Did he fight? Did he cry? He was asleep when they broke in. I tried to get to him, but one of the men... She touched the scar on her jaw. He hit me. Hard enough that I didn't wake up until morning. By then they were gone. All of them. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Use that anger to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Nalia's eyes reflected the firelight. That's what I'm doing. Building a place where these children can be safe, where no one can take them again. What if Haynes's people come looking? What if there are others? Then we fight, and if we can't fight, we run. And if we can't run? She paused. We make sure the children know they're loved. That's all any of us can do. The second day was harder. One of the wagons broke a wheel on a hidden rock. It took 3 hours to fix, time they couldn't afford to lose. The children grew more anxious as the day wore on. Sarah started having nightmares even while awake, screaming about men with guns. Thomas threw up twice from fear and motion sickness. Emma wouldn't let go of Dulce's hand. Only Charlotte remained silent, her eyes tracking everything, trusting nothing. They camped that night at the base of a canyon wall. The wind howled through the rocks, making sounds that frightened the children. Cutter built the fire bigger, told stories about mountain lions and bears that the children fought off with courage and cleverness. Are there really mountain lions here? Thomas asked, eyes wide. Sure, but they're more scared of you than you are of them. I don't think that's true. Cutter smiled, the first real smile Dulce had seen from him in days. Maybe not, but it sounds good, doesn't it? That night, Charlotte finally spoke. Just 2 words, whispered so quietly, Dulce almost missed them. Thank you. Dulce looked over. The girl was staring at her plate of food, her hands shaking. You're welcome, sweetheart. For what? For not leaving me there. The words broke something open in the clearing. Sarah started crying. Thomas wrapped his arms around his sisters. Even Clay looked up from his wooden horse, sensing the shift in the air. Nalia moved to Charlotte, pulled her into a gentle embrace. No one's leaving anyone, not ever again. You understand? We're family now, all of us. Charlotte nodded against her shoulder and cried for the first time since Captain Mitchell had found her. The third day brought them to the canyon. Dulce saw it from a distance first, a great gash in the earth, red stone walls rising hundreds of feet high. As they descended the narrow trail, the world changed. Warmer air rose from below. Green things grew in protected spots. Water trickled from springs in the rock. The settlement sat at the canyon floor, hidden from above. A dozen structures built from stone and wood, some traditional, some influenced by white construction. Smoke rose from cooking fires. People moved between buildings, stopped to stare as the wagons approached. A woman ran forward, shouting something in the same language Nalia spoke. She was older, gray-haired, with a face creased by weather and worry. Nalia jumped down from the wagon and was immediately engulfed in the woman's embrace. My mother, she explained when she could speak. She's been caring for the first 4 children I brought back. More people emerged, men, women, children, elders. They crowded around the wagon, speaking rapidly, reaching for the children with gentle hands. Sarah, Thomas, and Emma were lifted down, swept into a tide of welcome and concern. Charlotte hesitated until Dulce climbed down with her, keeping one hand on her shoulder. It's okay. These are good people. Nalia's mother approached them, studied Dulce with sharp eyes. She said something in her language. Nalia responded, and whatever she said made the older woman's face soften. She wants to know if you're the one who protected Clay, Nalia translated. We both did, me and Mr. Cutter. Nalia's mother looked at Cutter, still sitting on the wagon with his rifle across his knees. She spoke again. She says you're both welcome here for as long as you want to stay. Nalia smiled. She also says you look like you could use a good meal and a bath. Dulce laughed, surprising herself. She's not wrong. They were shown to a stone house near the center of the settlement,
2 rooms, a fire pit, sleeping pallets already laid out. Simple but clean. It felt like a palace compared to what they'd had. That night, the settlement held a gathering. Food was shared. Cornbread, roasted meat, vegetables cooked with herbs Dulce didn't recognize. The children sat together, still wary, but the other children in the settlement coaxed them into games, into smiles. Clay ran to Dulce every few minutes, checking that she was still there, then ran back to play. Each time he returned, his smile was bigger. Nalia stood to speak, and the crowd quieted. She spoke in her language first, then switched to English for Dulce and Cutter's benefit. We have brought home more of our stolen children. 4 more souls returned to us. This is cause for celebration. Her voice carried across the gathering. But we cannot forget that there are still others out there, taken, suffering, alone. Our work is not finished. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I have asked these 2, Dulce and Ephraim, to join us, to help build a place of safety, to help find the children still missing. Nalia looked at them. They have proven their courage, their hearts. They are welcome here as family. The crowd erupted in approval. People came forward to shake Cutter's hand, to embrace Dulce, to speak words she didn't understand but felt the meaning of anyway. Welcome, safety, home. Later, when the gathering had wound down and the children were asleep, Dulce sat outside the stone house looking up at the stars. They were brighter here, away from town lights, sharp enough to hurt. Cutter emerged from inside, sat beside her on the ground. You thinking about your son? He asked. Always, but also, she gestured at the settlement. This, all of this. A week ago, I was standing on an auction block thinking my life was over. And now you're in a canyon raising 6 traumatized children with an Indian woman and a mountain hermit. Funny how things work out. She laughed. Is that what you are? A hermit? Was, past tense. He looked at the settlement, at the warm lights and windows, at the sound of people living their lives. Don't think I can go back to being alone after this. You never have to be alone again. You know that, right? He turned to look at her, his scarred face soft in the starlight. Neither do you. Nalia approached, Clay sleeping against her shoulder. I'm putting him to bed. Did you want to? I'll come, Dulce said, standing. Together the 3 of them walked inside. They laid Clay on a pallet between where Dulce and Nalia would sleep. He didn't wake, just made a small sound and curled into a ball. 2 mothers, Nalia said softly. That's what he has now. 2 mothers who would die for him. 3 parents, Dulce corrected, glancing at Cutter, if he'll have us. I think he already has, Nalia said. That night, Dulce fell asleep listening to Clay's breathing on one side and Nalia's on the other, with Cutter standing guard outside like he'd done on the mountain, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. Morning came with news. Captain Mitchell rode into the settlement with 2 soldiers, bringing word from Copperbend. The trial had been fast. Haynes had been convicted on all charges. 20 years hard labor, his assets seized to compensate the families of stolen children. There's more, Mitchell said, his face grim. We found records. Ledgers showing every child he took, where he sent them, how much he was paid. 314 children over 5 years. The number hung in the air like poison. We're going through them now, Mitchell continued, trying to track down as many as we can. Some are dead. Some are... He stopped. Some we may never find, but we're trying. Nalia took the ledgers he offered, spread them on a table. Names and dates and locations, all written in neat columns. Someone's horrible bookkeeping. Dulce looked over her shoulder and stopped breathing. There, on page 17, written in faded ink, male infant, born March 15th, 1823, Copperbend Workhouse. Sold to J. Morrison, Silver Creek. Price, $12. Her son. The baby taken from her arms. He had a name now. Not Clay. That was her name for him, never spoken. His legal name, the one the buyer gave him. Can you track this Morrison? She asked, her voice shaking. Mitchell checked his notes. Joseph Morrison, rancher, died last year of fever. Dulce's heart sank. And the child? I don't know, but I can find out. Please. She gripped his arm. Please find out. I will. I promise.
He left with his soldiers, taking the ledgers to continue the search. Dulce stood in the doorway watching them go, hope and fear warring inside her. "We'll find him," Nalia said behind her, "however long it takes." And Dulce believed her, because that's what family did. They didn't give up. They kept searching. They kept fighting. They kept hope alive, even when it hurt. The weeks that followed Mitchell's visit blurred together in a rhythm Dulce had never experienced before. Work? Yes, there was always work. The children needed feeding, teaching, comforting. The settlement needed hands for building, harvesting, preparing for winter. But it wasn't the grinding, joyless labor of the workhouse. This work had purpose. This work built something. Clay thrived. He played with the other children now, his laughter ringing across the canyon. He still called Dulce Mama Dulce and Nalia Mama Nalia without hesitation, as if having two mothers was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe for him it was. Charlotte had started speaking more, though she still had nightmares. Sarah, Thomas, and Emma clung to each other less desperately, ventured further from familiar faces. Progress came in inches, not miles, but it came. Cutter surprised everyone by becoming the children's favorite storyteller. Every night they'd gather around him by the fire, begging for tales about bears and bandits and brave children who outsmarted monsters. He grumbled about it, but Dulce saw the way his face softened when little Emma climbed into his lap, the way he adjusted his stories when Thomas got scared, making the endings gentler. "You're good with them," Dulce told him one evening after the children had gone to bed. "I remember what worked with my daughter." His voice was quiet. "Seems some things don't change. She'd be proud of you, what you're doing here." He looked at her, those gray eyes reflecting firelight. "You think so?" "I know so." Nalia joined them by the fire, tired but smiling. "The council met today. They've agreed to expand the settlement, build more houses. We're expecting more children in the spring. Captain Mitchell says he's tracked down at least 15 more from the ledgers." 15, Dulce repeated. "That's a lot." "I know. We'll need more help, more supplies, more everything." Nalia sat down, accepted the cup of coffee Cutter handed her. "But we'll manage. Somehow, we always do." "I can ride back to the cabin," Cutter offered. "Bring down more tools, whatever stores I have left. Maybe hunt on the way back." "That would help, thank you." They sat in comfortable silence. This had become their routine, the three of them, talking through problems, making plans, building something none of them could have built alone. "No word yet," Nalia said gently, reading Dulce's mind. "From Mitchell about your son." "I know, every time someone rides in, I think maybe—" Dulce stopped. "It's stupid." "It's not stupid. It's hope. That's the hardest thing to carry, but the most important." 3 weeks later, a rider came. Not Mitchell, but one of his soldiers, a young corporal named Davies who looked barely old enough to shave. He rode in at midday, his horse lathered and tired. Dulce saw him from across the settlement and felt her heart stop. She ran, her feet barely touching the ground. Do you have news?" Davies dismounted, pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. "From Captain Mitchell, ma'am. He said to give this directly to you." Her hand shook so badly she could barely open it. Nalia appeared beside her, steadying her, and Cutter stood at her back like a wall. The letter was short, Mitchell's handwriting cramped and efficient. "Miss May, I've located the child sold to Joseph Morrison. After Morrison's death, the boy was taken in by Morrison's sister, Margaret, who runs a small farm outside Silver Creek. I visited the property. The boy is alive and appears healthy. He's called James Morrison now. He's 3 years old. I did not tell Mrs. Morrison about you. I thought you should decide how to proceed. If you want to pursue legal action for custody, I can help. If you want to visit, I can arrange it. If you want to leave things as they are, I'll respect that. Whatever you choose, know that the boy is safe and cared for. Respectfully, Captain James Mitchell." Dulce read it 3 times before the words made sense. Of, healthy, safe, cared for, not stolen by monsters, not sold to work camps, not dead in some unmarked grave. "What are you going to do?" Nalia asked softly. "I don't know." Dulce looked at the letter, at Mitchell's careful words. "He's safe. That's what matters, right? He's with family, real family. And you're his mother. I was his mother for 6 weeks. This Margaret, she's had him for 3 years. She's the only mother he knows. The words hurt coming out. What right do I have to disrupt that?
Cutter spoke from behind her. The right of someone who's been searching for 3 years. The right of someone who never stopped loving him. But what's best for him? That's what matters. Not what I want. What's best for James? The name felt foreign in her mouth. Not Clay. That was someone else's son. This was James. A boy she'd never met but had never stopped loving.
Maybe you should visit, Nalia suggested. Meet him. Meet this Margaret. See for yourself what his life is like. Then decide. It was the most terrifying suggestion Dulce had ever heard, and the most necessary. I'll go, she said, but not alone. I can't. We'll come with you, Cutter said immediately. All of us, Nalia added. The children too. Make it a journey. Show them there's a world beyond the canyon.
So they prepared. Cutter hitched up the wagon, loaded supplies. Nalia spoke with the council, arranged for others to watch the settlement. The children were excited about an adventure, even Charlotte, who smiled when Sarah asked if they'd see snow again. Only Clay seemed uncertain. Are we coming back? He asked Dulce the night before they left. Of course, baby. This is home. We're just visiting. Promise? She hugged him tight. I promise. The journey to Silver Creek took 5 days, longer than it might have because they traveled with children, because they stopped often for meals and rest, and to let the little ones run off energy. But Dulce was grateful for the delay. Each day closer to Silver Creek was a day closer to answers she wasn't sure she wanted. They arrived on a gray afternoon. Silver Creek was bigger than Copperbend, more prosperous. Real storefronts, brick buildings, a church with a proper steeple. Cutter found them rooms at a boarding house while Nalia took the children to a park to burn off the restlessness of travel. Tomorrow, Dulce said, staring out the window at the unfamiliar streets. I'll go tomorrow. But tomorrow came too fast. Captain Mitchell met them at the boarding house, looking older than Dulce remembered. The work of tracking down stolen children had aged him. The Morrison farm is about an hour's ride north, he told them. I sent word you were coming. Mrs. Morrison said you're welcome to visit. What did you tell her? Dulce asked. That you had information about her nephew's birth family, that you wanted to meet him. Nothing more. Mitchell's eyes were kind. How you tell her the rest, that's up to you. The farm sat in a valley surrounded by low hills, neat fields, a sturdy house, a barn that looked recently painted. Chickens scratched in a yard. Smoke rose from the chimney. A woman emerged as they rode up, tall, thin, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple dress and an apron, her hands dusted with flour. Captain Mitchell, she called out, you're punctual. I appreciate that. Her eyes moved to Dulce, Nalia, and Cutter. You must be the visitors. Yes, ma'am. I'm Dulce May. This is Nalia Whitewater and Ephraim Cutter. Margaret Morrison studied each of them in turn, her face unreadable. Come in. I've got coffee on and cake just out of the oven. The house was warm and clean, filled with the smell of baking. Toys were scattered in one corner. Wooden blocks, a stuffed rabbit, a ball, evidence of a child loved. James is napping, Margaret said, pouring coffee. He'll be up soon. He's an early riser, which means afternoon naps are mandatory, or we all suffer. She smiled, but there was wariness in her eyes. The captain said you have information about his birth family? Dulce's mouth went dry. Yes, ma'am. I'm his birth mother, she said, the words tumbling out. I gave birth to him at the workhouse in Copperbend 3 years ago. They took him when he was 6 weeks old, told me he was going to a good family. I've been looking for him ever since. The room went absolutely silent. Margaret set down her coffee cup with a hand that shook slightly. I see. I didn't come to take him from you, Dulce rushed on. I needed to know he was all right. Needed to see him. That's all. That's all? Margaret's voice was sharp. You show up claiming to be his mother and you think I'll just… What? Let you meet him? Confuse him? Disrupt the only life he's known? Mrs. Morrison, Nalia said gently, we understand this is difficult, but Dulce has rights too. The right to know her child is safe. She gave him up. They took him from me, Dulce corrected, her voice breaking. I didn't have a choice. I was 16, alone, with no money and no power. The workhouse made the decision. I just had to live with it. Margaret stood, paced to the window. My brother, Joe, he couldn't have children. His wife died trying. When he got the chance to adopt a baby, he was so happy, so full of hope. Her voice wavered. He loved that boy for 2 years before the fever took him. And then James came to me. Another loss for the poor child. But I've tried. I've done my best to give him stability, love, a home. I can see that, Dulce said. This is a beautiful home, and you clearly care for him. I'm grateful. Truly. Then what do you want? It was the question Dulce had been asking herself for 5 days. What did she want? To take James back? To tear him away from the only family he knew? To claim him because biology said she could? No. That wasn't what this was about. I want to meet him, she said slowly. I want to see that he's happy, and then… She took a breath. Then I want to know if there's room in his life for me, not as his mother, you're his mother, but as someone who loves him, someone who's part of his story. Margaret turned from the window, tears on her face. You're asking me to share him. I'm asking you to let him know where he came from, who he came from. So when he's older, when he asks questions, you have answers to give him. Dulce's voice steadied. I've learned something these past few months. Family isn't about blood or law or who has the best claim. It's about love. And there's enough love to go around if we're brave enough to share it. The older woman studied her for a long moment. Then she walked to the stairs and called up, James, time to wake up, sweetheart. Footsteps pattered above. A door opened, and then a small boy appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. He had Dulce's dark hair, her chin, her hands. But he had his father's eyes, that merchant's son who'd lied so easily. And he had the Morrison family's solid build, their square shoulders. He was hers and not hers, familiar and foreign. He was perfect. Auntie Maggie, I'm hungry, he said, his voice still thick with sleep. I know, love. Come down. We have visitors. James descended the stairs carefully, one hand on the rail. When he reached the bottom, he looked at the strangers in his kitchen with curiosity but no fear. Hello, he said politely. Hello, James, Dulce managed. My name is Dulce. That's a pretty name, like candy. She laughed, tears streaming down her face. Yes, like candy. He studied her with those two familiar eyes. Why are you crying? Are you sad? No, baby. I'm happy. Very, very happy. Margaret put her hand on James's shoulder. These people knew you when you were a tiny baby. They came a long way to see how you've grown. Oh. James thought about this. Was I cute when I was tiny? The cutest, Dulce whispered. They spent the afternoon together. James showed them his room, his toys, the kittens in the barn. He chattered constantly, unafraid, comfortable in his world. Margaret watched with careful eyes, but she didn't interfere. Cutter taught James to skip stones in the creek. Nalia told him stories that made him laugh. Dulce just watched, memorizing every detail, storing them up against the years she'd missed. When it was time to leave, James hugged each of them goodbye. When he reached Dulce, he said, Will you come back? Would you like that? Yes, you're nice, and you smell like flowers. She laughed through tears. Then yes, I'll come back. Margaret walked them to the wagon. He should know, she said quietly, when he's older, about you, about where he came from. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. It's complicated, messy. I don't know how it's all going to work. Neither do I, Dulce admitted, but we'll figure it out. Together. Margaret nodded, something like relief crossing her face. Together. They rode away as the sun set, painting the valley gold and red. Dulce looked back once and saw James waving from the porch, Margaret's hand on his shoulder. You did good, Cutter said quietly. I didn't do anything. I let him be happy. That's everything, Nalia said. That's what being a parent means. Wanting their happiness more than your own. When they returned to the canyon, word had already spread. Not about James, but about something else. Captain Mitchell had arrived with news. He stood in the center of the settlement, surrounded by people, holding papers. "We found them," he was saying as Dulce approached. "The last of the children from Haynes's ledgers. 38 of them. Some are in work camps. Some are with families who bought them not knowing they were stolen. Some—" He stopped. "Some we're still negotiating for, but we know where they are. We can bring them home." Cheers erupted. People embraced. Nalia's mother wept openly. "There's more," Mitchell continued. "The territorial governor has established a fund for families affected by child theft, for settlements like this one. You'll have resources now, legal protection, a voice." More cheers. Dulce felt Nalia grab her hand, squeeze hard. "It's not enough," Nalia said fiercely. "It'll never be enough to make up for what was taken. But it's a start." Over the following months, children arrived in waves, some alone, some in groups, each one traumatized in different ways, each one needing patience, time, safety. The settlement expanded. New houses rose from the canyon floor. A school was built, with a teacher from the reservation who spoke 3 languages. Gardens were planted. Walls were reinforced. Dulce found herself teaching the younger children, not reading or arithmetic, but survival. How to cook. How to mend clothes. How to recognize safe plants from poisonous ones. Skills she'd learned in the workhouse, put to better use. Cutter led the older children on hunting trips, teaching them to track and shoot and respect the land. He built things. Better water systems, storage sheds, a workshop where the children could learn carpentry. Nalia became the settlement's voice to the outside world. She traveled to territorial meetings, to council sessions, arguing for laws to protect Indian children, for punishment of those who'd profit from their suffering. She was fierce and uncompromising, and people learned to listen. Clay grew like a weed, all energy and questions. He still had 2 mothers, but now he had siblings too. Sarah and Emma followed him everywhere, and he took his role as big brother seriously. Charlotte slowly emerged from her shell. She started helping Dulce with the younger children, her patience and gentleness perfect for the most frightened ones. She rarely spoke about what had happened to her, but sometimes Dulce would find her crying silently, and she'd just hold her until the storm passed. One evening, 6 months after James, Dulce sat on a ridge overlooking the settlement. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children played in the last of the daylight. Laughter echoed off the canyon walls. Cutter found her there. "Nalia's looking for you. Something about the new arrivals tomorrow." "I'll be there in a minute." She didn't move. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if you hadn't come to that auction?" He sat beside her. "Every day. I'd be alone on that mountain. Probably drunk. Definitely miserable. And I'd still be at the workhouse. Or worse. We got lucky." "Did we? Or did we make our own luck?" She looked at the settlement. "All these children, all these people. We built this. The 3 of us and everyone else who refused to accept that stolen children were just the cost of living." "You getting philosophical on me?" "Maybe. I've had a lot of time to think." She pulled her knees to her chest. "I used to think family was something you were born into, something that happened to you. But that's not true. Family is something you build, something you choose. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it breaks your heart. But it's yours." "Is this about James?" "Partly. I saw him last week. Margaret invited me to his birthday party." Dulce smiled at the memory. "He called me Miss Dulce and asked if I'd brought presents. It hurt, not being his mother. But also, I got to be there. I got to see him blow out candles and open gifts and be happy. That's more than I ever thought I'd have." "And that's enough?" "It has to be. Because the alternative is nothing, and I can't do nothing." She looked at Cutter. "We save who we can save. We love who we can love. We build what we can build. That's all any of us can do." A shout from below, Nalia waving them down. The new children had arrived early. They stood together, these 2 broken people who'd found purpose in each other's brokenness, and headed down to welcome more lost souls home. The children arrived in a wagon driven by Captain Mitchell, who was becoming a regular presence in the canyon. 7 of them this time, ranging from 18 months to 12 years, all with that same look in their eyes, the one that said they'd seen too much, lost too much, hurt too much. Dulce knew that look, had seen it in the mirror often enough. The settlement gathered to welcome them. Nalia spoke first in her language, then in English, telling them they were safe now, telling them this was home. The children didn't believe her. Not yet. Dulce hadn't believed it either at first, but over the following days and weeks, they'd see. They'd realize that food appeared regularly, that adults kept their promises, that other children played without fear, that nobody was coming to take them away again. They'd start to heal. Slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and nightmares and days when the past felt more real than the present. But they'd heal, and Dulce would be there to help, along with Nalia and Cutter and everyone else in this canyon who understood that saving children meant more than just pulling them from danger. It meant teaching them to trust again, to hope again, to believe that tomorrow might actually be better than today. One of the new children was a girl about Clay's age. She clung to the older boy who'd been protecting her, wouldn't let go even when offered food. Dulce knelt in front of them. "Hi, I'm Dulce. What's your name?" The girl didn't answer. The boy, maybe 9 or 10, said, "Her name's Ruby. She doesn't talk much." "That's okay. She doesn't have to." Dulce looked at Ruby's scared face and saw herself at 16, at 12, at every age where the world had proven itself cruel. "We have a place ready for you both. It's warm and there's food and nobody's going to hurt you, I promise." "Everyone says that," the boy said bitterly. "I know. And I know promises don't mean much when they've been broken before, but I'm still going to make them, and I'm still going to keep them. You'll see." She led them to a house where other children were already settling in. Sarah and Thomas immediately took charge, showing the newcomers where things were, explaining the rules, such as they were. Ruby finally let go of the older boy long enough to accept a bowl of soup from Charlotte. She ate mechanically, her eyes tracking every movement in the room. "She'll be okay," Nalia said quietly, appearing beside Dulce. "They all will be, eventually. I hope so. I know so, because they have us, and we have each other." Nalia smiled. "That's what we built here. Not just a settlement, a family. A messy, complicated, impossible family that shouldn't work, but does." That night, after the new children were fed and bathed and tucked into beds, after the settlement had quieted for the night, Dulce found herself unable to sleep. She walked to the ridge again, looking up at stars that stretched forever. Cutter joined her, as he always did. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from months of working side by side, of building something bigger than either of them. "You know what I realized today?" Dulce said finally. "I'm happy. Actually happy. I didn't think that was possible. It almost wasn't. If any single thing had gone differently. But it didn't. We're here. We made it." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling his warmth, his solidity. "We made it, Cutter." He put his arm around her, and they sat like that while the canyon slept below them and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the darkness, children dreamed of better tomorrows. The weeks turned into months, the months into a year. More children came. Some stayed. Some, once they'd healed enough, went back to family members who'd been searching for them. Each departure hurt, but it also felt right. They weren't building a prison, they were building a refuge. Dulce visited James every few months, watched him grow from a shy 3-year-old into a talkative 4-year-old who asked endless questions and had opinions about everything. Margaret softened toward her, even invited her to stay for dinner sometimes. They'd never be close, but they were something. Allies, maybe. Co-conspirators in loving the same boy. Clay started calling Cutter Papa Cutter, without anyone suggesting it. The first time it happened, Cutter's face went through such a complicated series of emotions that Dulce almost laughed. But then he'd knelt down and told Clay that yes, he could call him Papa if he wanted, and his voice had been so gentle it made her cry. Charlotte turned 7 and started reading to the younger children. Sarah, Thomas, and Emma became inseparable from 3 other siblings who'd arrived in the spring. Ruby finally started talking, her voice quiet but determined. The settlement held a harvest celebration that fall. Food and music and dancing that went late into the night. Children ran wild, drunk on freedom and sugar. Adults laughed and told stories and felt, for one evening, like the weight of the world wasn't quite so heavy. Dulce danced with Cutter, who was terrible at it but tried anyway. Danced with Clay, lifting him up so his feet didn't touch the ground. Danced with Nalia, both of them laughing at nothing and everything. "This is what we fought for," Nalia said, breathless and smiling. "This right here, children who can laugh, who can feel safe enough to be children. We did good, Dulce agreed. We did, and we're not done yet.
They weren't. There were always more children who needed help, always more battles to fight. Captain Mitchell brought news regularly, some good, some heartbreaking. The territorial government had passed new laws protecting Indian children, but enforcement was patchy. Some families got their children back. Others never would. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't even close to perfect. But it was real and hard-won, and theirs. Winter came again, their second in the canyon. Snow covered the red rocks, turning the world white and clean. The children loved it, building snow forts and having battles that left everyone soaked and laughing. On the shortest day of the year, the settlement gathered for a ceremony Nalia had planned. Each person, adult and child, was invited to place a stone in a cairn they'd been building at the settlement's center. For remembering, Nalia explained, for everyone we lost, everyone we saved, everyone we're still looking for. One by one, people added their stones. Some cried. Some spoke names. Some just placed their stone in silence and walked away. When it was Dulce's turn, she held her stone, smooth river rock, dark and heavy, and thought about the baby taken from her arms, the boy she'd found and loved and had to share, the children sleeping safe in the canyon, the families she'd built from broken pieces. She placed her stone and stepped back. Cutter's stone joined hers, then Nalia's. Then Clay's small pebble, placed carefully on top. The cairn grew until it was taller than a man, a monument to loss and survival and the stubborn refusal to give up. That night, Dulce stood on her ridge one last time, but this time she wasn't alone. Cutter was there, and Nalia, and half a dozen children who'd followed them up despite the cold. "Tell us a story, Papa Cutter," Clay demanded. "Which one?" "The one about the girl nobody wanted." Dulce looked at him sharply. "Where did you hear about that?" "Mama Nalia told me. She said it's a good story, a true one." Cutter met Dulce's eyes. She nodded. "All right," he said, settling onto a rock with Clay in his lap, and the other children gathered around. "Once upon a time, there was a girl nobody wanted. She stood on an auction block while people laughed and pointed and said terrible things. The children listened, rapt. But one person saw her differently, saw that she was strong and brave and deserving of better. So he stepped forward and said, 'I'll take her.' And everything changed." "Did they live happily ever after?" Emma asked. Cutter smiled. "They lived, they fought, they built something good. That's better than happily ever after. That's real." Clay looked up at Dulce. "You were the girl, right? And Papa Cutter saved you?" "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's how the best stories go." As the children chattered about the story, Nalia moved beside Dulce. "You know what I think?" she said quietly. "What?" "I think we're writing a new kind of story. One where family doesn't look like what we were told it should look like. Where mothers can be made, not just born. Where healing is messy and slow, but possible. Where children stolen by cruelty can be saved by stubbornness and love." "That's a good story," Dulce said. "It's our story. And it's not over yet." Below them, the settlement glowed with firelight. Smoke rose from chimneys. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere else, someone sang in a language that had survived centuries of trying to erase it. They'd built this. All of them together. Built it from nothing but need and determination and the refusal to accept that some children weren't worth saving. Dulce thought about the girl she'd been, unwanted, afraid, certain her life would never amount to anything. And she thought about who she was now, a mother to children who weren't hers by blood but were hers nonetheless, a partner to people who'd become family not through law but through choice, a fighter for stolen children, a builder of refuge, a keeper of hope. The journey from that auction block to this ridge had been impossible, and yet here she stood. "Come on," Cutter said, standing with Clay still in his arms. "Let's get these kids inside before they freeze." They walked down together, all of them, this family that shouldn't exist but did. And as they descended into the warmth and light of the settlement, Dulce realized something important. She'd spent years searching for where she belonged. Turned out, belonging wasn't a place you found. It was something you built, one day and one choice and one act of courage at a time. And she'd built it here, with these people, in this canyon that had become home. The children ran ahead, eager for hot chocolate and warm blankets.
Nalia walked beside her, talking about plans for spring planting. Cutter brought up the rear, watchful as always, protecting what they'd made. Dulce looked back one last time at the ridge, at the stars above it, at the vast world beyond that still held stolen children and broken families and people who needed hope. They couldn't save everyone, but they could save some. And they would keep trying, keep building, keep fighting until every last child was home. That was the story. Not a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but a real story with real people doing real work. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.